You've probably had a dog stare at you like it knows something you don't. Maybe it growled at an empty room, or refused to walk past a certain house, or started acting strange minutes before something went wrong. Most of the time, that's nothing. Sometimes, throughout history, it wasn't. Dogs have stood at the center of some of the strangest, darkest chapters humans have ever written. Legends that turned into real body counts. Experiments that turned real dogs into something closer to lab equipment. And mysteries modern science still can't fully explain. Some of what you're about to hear will make you look at your own dog differently. Some of it will make you glad it's just a dog, and not something worse. 11 of the darkest dog legends and mysteries in history. And by the end, you may never trust a howl in the dark the same way again. We're starting in 18th century France, with a creature that killed for 3 straight years and was never fully identified. Between 1764 and 1767, something in the Gévaudan region of south-central France killed close to 100 people, most of them women and children, in a string of attacks so vicious that witnesses described a creature far larger than any wolf they'd ever seen. Reddish fur, an oversized head, a habit of going straight for the throat instead of dragging victims off to eat elsewhere. King Louis XV eventually put up a bounty large enough to draw professional wolf hunters from across the country, and the French army got involved directly. And it still took 3 years to stop the killing. In 1767, a local hunter named Jean Chastel shot a large wolf that was found with human remains still in its stomach, and the attacks ended immediately after. Whether that single animal accounted for every death, or whether Chastel simply got the last of several working the same territory, has never been fully settled. Some historians still argue it wasn't a wolf at all, but a trained animal set loose on purpose by someone who had a reason to want the region terrorized. On August 4th, 1577, during a violent thunderstorm, a massive black dog reportedly burst through the doors of Holy Trinity Church in Bungay, England, ran down the center aisle past a terrified congregation, and left 2 parishioners dead where they knelt. The same storm produced a nearly identical account at another church in nearby Blythburgh that same afternoon, where scorch marks on the north door are still visible today, and locally attributed to the animal's claws as it tore its way back outside. Witnesses described its eyes as glowing red, its size closer to a calf than a dog. The creature became known as Black Shuck, a name that had already existed in East Anglian folklore for a spectral hound said to stalk the coastline at night, and reported sightings of a huge black dog along that same stretch of England continued for centuries afterward. The physical damage to the church door is real and still there. What actually walked, ran, or was struck by lightning through that building in 1577 has never been agreed on. Overtoun Bridge sits on the grounds of a Scottish country estate near Dumbarton, and since at least the 1950s, dogs have been jumping from it. Not falling, jumping, deliberately, always from the same stretch of parapet, always down into the 50-foot gorge below. Estimates of how many dogs have died there over the decades run into the dozens, and local rescue workers have documented cases of dogs that survived the fall, were carried back up, and immediately tried to jump again. Investigators have proposed a few explanations. The smell of mink nesting in the rocks below driving dogs into a hunting frenzy, or the layout of the bridge creating a kind of optical illusion where the drop isn't visible from a dog's eye level until it's too late. Neither theory fully explains why it's almost always the same breeds, or why it's almost always the same 20 feet of railing. The bridge already had a reputation for something being wrong with it before the dog death started. In 1994, the owner of the estate's house walked onto it and threw his infant son over the edge, later telling police the Antichrist had told him to. Between the 1500s and 1600s, courts across France, Germany, and Switzerland tried and executed people for being werewolves, using largely the same torture-driven confession process used in the witch trials happening at the same time. The most notorious case involved a German farmer named Peter Stump, executed in 1589 near Cologne after confessing under torture to killing and eating at least 14 people, including his own son, while transformed by a belt he claimed the devil had given him. His execution alone took hours. His flesh was torn off with red-hot pincers before he was broken on a wheel, beheaded, and burned. Historians generally agree the confessions in these cases were extracted through torture rather than reflecting anything the accused actually believed. But the belief in literal wolf transformation among the surrounding communities appears to have been genuine, not performed for the court. Somewhere between 100 and 200 people across Europe were formally tried on werewolf-related charges during this period. Most of them were executed. For over 1,000 years, mapmakers, historians, and travelers described an entire race of dog-headed humans living somewhere just past the edge of the known world. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about them in the 5th century BC. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder placed them specifically in the hill country of India. Marco Polo, writing in the 13th century about his travels through Asia, claimed to have gathered first-hand accounts of an island population with the heads and teeth of dogs and the bodies of men. Medieval European maps like the Hereford Mappamundi placed Cynocephaly at the literal edges of the illustrated world, alongside other creatures nobody had actually verified. The belief wasn't confined to folklore either. Early tradition in the Eastern Church held that Saint Christopher himself came from a tribe of dog-headed people before his conversion, and icons depicting him with a canine head are still preserved and venerated in Orthodox and Coptic churches today, more than 1,000 years after the legend first took shape. Nearly every mythology with an underworld put a dog at its gate. In Greek mythology, Cerberus, a three-headed hound with a serpent for a tail, guarded the entrance to Hades and kept the dead from ever walking back out. Norse mythology has Garmr, a blood-soaked hound chained at the entrance to Hell's realm, prophesied to kill and be killed by the god Tyr during Ragnarok. Welsh folklore describes the Cún Annwn, a spectral pack of white, red-eared hunting dogs that ride through the sky collecting souls of the dying, their howls said to grow quieter the closer they get, the opposite of what you'd expect. In Aztec belief, a dog named Xolotl was said to guide the souls of the dead across the underworld's rivers, and dogs of the Xoloitzcuintli breed, which still exists today, were sometimes buried alongside their owners, specifically to serve as that guide. These traditions developed independently, on different continents, with no contact between them, and nearly all of them landed on the same idea. Whatever waits on the other side of death, a dog gets there first. Ivan Pavlov's conditioning experiments in the early 1900s are famous for one detail: a bell, some drooling, and a Nobel Prize. But the actual lab work behind it was far more invasive. Dogs underwent surgery to have their salivary ducts rerouted through an opening in their cheek so researchers could measure saliva output directly, a modification some of them lived with for years. Pavlov also ran what he called experimental neurosis studies, forcing dogs to distinguish between an increasingly similar circle and ellipse until the task became impossible, at which point the animals reliably broke down into visible distress, shaking, biting at their restraints, refusing to respond to any stimulus at all. Soviet science followed his methods further than most people realize. In 1954, a Soviet surgeon named Vladimir Demikov grafted the head and front legs of a puppy onto the neck of a fully grown adult dog. And photographs from the experiment show both heads alive at once, reportedly lapping water and reacting independently to their surroundings. The dog survived the procedure for several days. Demikov performed variations of the surgery close to 20 times over the following years. In the 1930s, a German dog trainer named Margareta Schmidt opened a school in Leutenburg dedicated to teaching dogs to talk, as part of a broader Nazi-era fascination with proving that animals possessed near-human intelligence. Dogs were trained to tap out letters with their paws or approximate words through controlled barking and mouth movements, and one Airedale Terrier named Rolf became a minor celebrity, with trainers claiming he could do arithmetic, spell out full sentences, and hold something resembling a conversation. Some Nazi officials took the program seriously enough to fund it further, reportedly hoping a dog that could communicate might eventually serve as a spy, a messenger, or a soldier capable of reporting battlefield conditions no human could safely observe. Independent observers who tested the dogs later concluded the animals were almost certainly responding to unconscious cues from their handlers, rather than actually forming language. The same effect later documented in cases like Clever Hans, the counting horse. The school's records and its ambitions were, by any measure, completely real. What it actually produced was a very well-trained dog and a great deal of wishful thinking. In 1917, a stray dog attached himself to a group of American soldiers training in Connecticut, and by the time they shipped out to France, Private J. Robert Conroy had smuggled him aboard the transport ship and onto the front lines with the 102nd Infantry. The dog, later named Stubby, spent 18 months in the trenches and served in 17 battles. He learned to recognize the smell of poison gas before human soldiers could detect it, and reportedly ran through the trenches barking and biting at sleeping men to wake them during a surprise gas attack, giving the unit time to get their masks on. He located wounded soldiers stranded in no man's land by scent, and stayed with them until stretcher bearers arrived, and in one documented incident, cornered and held a German soldier by his pants until American troops reached them, an act that got him promoted to the rank of sergeant, technically outranking the man who'd smuggled him overseas in the first place. He survived shrapnel wounds and a gas attack of his own, came home a celebrity, and met 3 U.S. presidents before he died of old age in 1926. On November 3, 1957, the Soviet Union launched a stray dog named Laika into orbit aboard Sputnik 2, less than a month after Sputnik 1 had proven a satellite could reach space at all. Laika had been picked up off the streets of Moscow specifically because strays were assumed to already be conditioned to cold and hunger in a way a pampered pet wouldn't be. The spacecraft was never designed to come back down. Soviet officials told the public at the time that Laika survived comfortably in orbit for several days before being painlessly put to sleep through her food supply, and that version of events stood for over 4 decades. In 2002, a Russian scientist who had worked on the mission finally revealed what actually happened. A failure in the capsule's thermal control system caused the interior to overheat almost immediately after launch, and Laika likely died from heat and panic within just a few hours of liftoff, far earlier and far more painfully than anyone had admitted. Decades later, Oleg Gazenko, one of the scientists responsible for selecting her, said publicly that the mission taught them almost nothing that justified what happened to her, and that he regretted it more the older he got. Long after the legends and the lab experiments, one dog-related mystery is still sitting entirely inside modern, peer-reviewed science, and researchers still can't fully explain it. Trained detection dogs have identified certain cancers in human breath and skin samples with accuracy rates that rival expensive lab equipment. In some published studies, picking out cancerous samples correctly more than 90% of the time, despite nobody being able to isolate the exact scent compound they're keying in on. Diabetic alert dogs reliably warn their owners of dangerously low blood sugar minutes before any glucose monitor would catch it, reacting to some change in scent or behavior humans haven't identified yet. Seizure alert dogs do something similar, showing agitation and pawing at their owners up to 45 minutes before an epileptic seizure actually starts, a warning window neurologists still can't fully account for medically. None of this requires a legend, a curse, or a hellhound. It's just a nose, evolved over tens of thousands of years alongside us, apparently picking up on changes in the human body that our own species hasn't figured out how to measure yet. So the next time your dog stares at nothing, or refuses to walk past a certain doorway, or starts acting strange for no reason you can find, it's worth remembering that we've never fully figured out what they're picking up on. And for a few thousand years now, we haven't needed to, because they usually turn out to be right about something. Legend, war, science, or just a nose that works better than anything we've built to replace it. Dogs keep ending up at the center of the moments we understand the least. If this one kept you watching till the end, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments which of these 11 surprised you most.